Mr. Connor, we are ready.
Good afternoon and welcome to the final segment of the 17th Annual Tennessee State Conference NAACP Race Relations and Advocacy Summit. I am David Connor, Tennessee State Youth Works Committee member and NAACP Next Gen 2020-2021 cohort participant. To our Spanish-speaking audience, todos son bienvenidos aquí. All are welcome. If you are not a member of our association, we encourage you to become a member today. Visit us at www.naacp.org and select the join icon. Also, if you're not following our president and CEO, please do so. You can follow him at Derrick NAACP at twitter.com or Derrick at NAACP at Instagram.com. We stand upon the state and a nation that oftentimes views communities of color as unseen or out of the mainstream. We witness current crises such as miseducation of our youth, mass incarceration of Black males, gentrification of communities of colors, police genocide, and also a lack of access to wealth of America's banks. But to make a difference and to change this narrative, we must get close to the issues and the problems we face. The Tennessee State Conference believes proximity makes all the difference in our ability to change these conditions. For the past 17 years, the Tennessee State Conference Race Relations and Advocacy Summit has taken a close look at the progress of race relations across the state of Tennessee. The summit annually brings together advocates and representatives from major corporations, public and private agencies, community-based organizations to discuss and explore the strategies of advancement. Therefore, we applaud forward thinking, conscious awareness, and a commitment to the challenges we face in this nation while seeking God's divine help. We would now like to ask the Alcoa Blount County Branch President, Dr. Willa Estelle, to bring the invocation.
Thank you. We are so grateful, God, for this 17th Annual Race Relations and Advocacy Summit. We are grateful, God, for our state president, Mrs. Gloria Sweetlove. We are so grateful for this time that you've given us, and God, for the conversation that we will have with our president. And so, Lord, we just ask that you would come, and God, that you would have your own way, be glorified in all that we do and all that we say. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen. This year's summit was made possible in part by our sponsors. This year's sponsorship includes Mr. Doug Roth, Jackson Market President of Bancorp South Bank, Ms. Kathy Sager, Regional Director of AT&T Tennessee, Ms. Beverly Watts, Director of the Tennessee Human Rights Commission, and Mr. Ted Austin, Vice President, Customer Service and Community Relations, Jackson Energy Authority. We will now ask Mrs. Beverly Watts and Mr. Doug Roth in that order to give a 3 to 5 minute word of greetings. Ms. Watts, you now have the floor.
Let me unmute. There we are. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mr. President and Madam President. I'm so happy to be in your presence today. To President Sweetlove, but more importantly to President Johnson, I just want to first say thank you for your leadership over this last year. Representative Johnson, you have done coast to coast, and I have seen you on all the coasts talking on every show possible. Without your voice, I don't think a lot of things would have happened this year. So let me just say thank you for that. I also want to reflect on where we are today. A year ago, we were getting ready to lock down. And a year ago, we were hopeful that things wouldn't last long. Well, here we are. I'm still locked down, sort of, kind of. But we are also locked into what I call this vicious cycle that America tends to get on every once in a while. It happened in about 1870, 1872. It happened again in 1898. It happened again in the early 19th century. And it continues to come and go. And that's this thing called racism in America. It peaks up and it gets very vicious from time to time. I think that I would never have thought that in 2021, we'd still be talking at the same level and the same volume that W.E.B. Du Bois talked about in the early 1900s. We are looking at America where race is a central issue. So this Race Relations Summit this year takes on a different light and a different urgency. Our urgency is that we now must work on these issues at a fervent level. Yes, we have friends in high places, but we also have to work in our communities because some of the people in our communities are not as word. I don't know that I can find at this point. I've been using different words in my house since I worked there alone that can't be shared with the public. But I think we know what I'm talking about, that there is a viciousness out here that's going on. And the viciousness is surrounded by race. At the commission, we're trying to maintain and move forward despite most of us working remotely. And that has put some issues on the body as we know it. However, we're continuing to move forward. I need to make sure that you all help us with voice and with ears to make sure across Tennessee that we know what's going on. There's a current eviction moratorium that the president signed. However, when that moratorium is lifted, we cannot expect that we're going to see things differently than we've seen with respect to other issues, whether it's COVID-19 or whether it's the deaths of individuals at the hand of police. And just yesterday, Amanda Gorman was told by a security guard that she looked suspicious. Now, we know suspicious is a code word for maybe you're too Black. And maybe we think you don't belong here. That's where we are today, and we need to be careful about that. So keep your eyes and ears open. Let us know how we can help, because the eviction moratorium could have a tremendous impact on the African-American community. As more and more workplaces open, we're concerned too that people are going to start making decisions about who they will bring back and how they will bring them back, and that race, once again, will be an issue. We know that for African-American women that they've been displaced and misplaced, and they've been treated badly in the workplace. Some of it is simply for wearing a hairstyle that some people think is not appropriate in 2021. So what I'd like to say today is thank you, NAACP. We look forward to working with you because we must all work together to make America what it ought to be. It is not going to be that way unless we work hard, lift our voices, and put our shoulder and muscle into it. I thank you for having me today on behalf of the Tennessee Human Rights Commission. Let us know how we can help. We're ready to be here. We stand with you. And as a fellow member, I stand with you after hours as well. And I'm pleased to work with you all on this Race Relations Summit. Thank you so much.
And Mr. Roth, you now have the floor, please.
Mr. Connor, I apologize. I am having some connection difficulties and I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir. I can hear you, Mr. Roth. Loud and clear.
I first want to say thank you to President Johnson and President Sweetlove for what you do every single day, along Mr. Connor with you as well. Bancorp South is once again proud to be a partner in this summit. This is, not sure how many years we have participated, but it's been an opportunity that we've enjoyed to be a part of. I am excited about not only this year, but 2022, when we will be back together face to face and holding hands. So I hope by then that is it happening. One of the things that Bancorp South continues to do throughout our community is stay community focused with our partners. And on behalf of Bancorp South, I just want to say thank you for again letting us be a part of this event. And I also want to give a shout out to Miss Daphne Nelson for all her help in getting me signed up. And once again, I apologize for my connection difficulties. Thank you.
Again, thank you to our sponsors for this year, during this year's Race Relation and Advocacy Summit. I would now like to introduce to you a humanitarian, an advocate, a godly woman who believes in community. She leads and mentors many from afar, an NAACP National Board member, and the Tennessee State Conference president. I now present to you the greatest state conference president on this side of heaven, Gloria J. Sweetlove.
Thank you so much, David. Good evening to each one of you all. Thanks to Ms. Watts and Mr. Roth and all of our other sponsors. And thank you, Dr. Estelle, for a beautiful prayer. And thank you to everyone. And thanks to my president for coming to be with us. You all that know me well know that I don't believe in long introductions and long remarks. I believe remarks should be no more than 2.5 minutes, and I plan to stay within that. The young man that I'm about to introduce or present to you really needs no introduction. You can turn on any of your cable channels, or go to Instagram or Twitter or wherever and see him advocating on a daily basis. But I want to say to you that because I consider him my son, and my other sons know I consider him one of them. But this young man, I give you a young man in the likes of a Benjamin L. Hooks, and in the likes of a Vernon Jordan, and of a Thurgood Marshall, and I don't say that lightly, who is not only a litigator, but an organizer. What many of you don't know that he has spent the last few years before becoming NAACP president, getting referendums passed across Mississippi and across Louisiana to make things better for Black and brown and working class folks. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the man that knows how to be a national president, because he's been a youth and college president, he's been a branch president, and he's been a state conference president. And as state conference president, he and I, being next door to each other in Tennessee and Mississippi, we would always coalesce and get on the same page before we had meetings, conventions, or whatever. But and so I'm proud that when he ascended, he still allows me to work with him. And when I say work, I don't say that lightly because he works me to death. But ladies and gentlemen, I want to present to you Letitia's husband and the 5 Johnson's children dad, the one and only President Derrick Johnson.
Thank you, Ms. Sweetlove, and thank you to the Tennessee State Conference NAACP. I can't see Alicia Brooks. I don't know if she's on, but hello to Alicia. Hello to Ms. Watts. I know those words you speak of that you say in the house in the solitude of being by yourself. We used to say them on the playground when I was in school, so I understand the words you speak of. I also want to thank all of the officers of this state conference, branch presidents and officers of all of our local units across the state of Tennessee. This is a conference that Ms. Sweetlove told me about years ago, and we could never get my schedule worked out where I can attend. But technology is a beautiful thing, and our ability as a community to be agile enough to do what we said just a year ago we wouldn't do is move into this space. And so much of what we have done over a year now, it was this time last month when we began to shut down much of our operations for the NAACP and go virtual. It was this time last year that so many of us became keenly aware of the crisis that we were in the midst of, a health pandemic that was global in nature. And in this nation, the strongest nation in the world, we lacked a federal response. It was this time last year that we were told by those who were in charge that this thing would go away in so many days, and 500,000 people who have died as a result of that anemic response from the prior administration. We realize that it's not as simple as waving a fist or saying a few words for it to go away, that it required action by us to take the necessary precautions to keep ourselves safe, to keep our families safe, to keep our community safe, and to inform all those on what we should do in the midst of this global health crisis, something that we have not seen in over 100 years since 1918. But we are the NAACP, 112 years old, with units across the country. The thing I love most about who we are, that we participate and practice in a small d democracy, something that we brought over from the governance and the tradition of the Black Baptist Church. And small d democracy can be messy. Small d democracy can appear to be confusion. Small d democracy would allow for those with the loudest voice to be heard, sometime in direct counter with what the majority actually feel and willing to do. Small d democracy is how we can determine the direction of not only this organization, but of this nation. And it's through that ability that we allow people to have voices in our local units, and those local units build up to a national voice that establishes the policy priorities for this association. So I want to thank all of you, because I understand in a small d democracy, in the NAACP, we are an organization of leaders, not a leader. That we understand that movements is not about one person, it's about all of us. That movements is not about us versus us, young versus old, male versus female. Movements are intergenerational. Movements are sustainable only if the individuals who are most impacted understand the role they play to keep things moving forward. So I'm not only proud to be in this seat, I'm honored, I'm privileged to be in this seat. That there's a Chinese philosopher that I subscribe to, which says that if you want to lead the people, walk behind them, not in front of them. Because when you're walking behind them, you can be informed by them to understand what it is that's important to them. And with all that being said, understanding that this 112-year-old organization needed fixing. It needed fixing from the plumbing and the pipes all the way up to the roof. And I am just elated that the National Board of Directors, a board that I served on, a board that elected me to the board and kicked me off the board and then brought me back onto the board, invested their trust that I could sit in this seat in this moment to retool this association, to make it an association that we needed to be looking forward to the next 112 years, operating not from a deficit mindset of what we can do, but the surplus of who we are, so we can make happen what we know should happen, looking towards a better reality. So I thank all of you for this opportunity, a most privileged opportunity, an opportunity that we need to stand up in this moment, because the last 4 years have been something that we have not seen at this elevation. The last 4 years opened up the Pandora box of open and notorious hostile racism. Now, some of you grew up in that reality. Some of us heard and were told the stories of that reality, but all of us who are still alive today have witnessed something that we didn't think was going to be possible. That the white supremacist behavior that we've always known to be the domestic terrorists in this nation will be so bold to go to the United States Capitol in a violent attempt seeking a coup. A coup d'etat is something that we have sent our troops around the globe to fight against and prevent, touting that we are the gold standard of a democracy. And yet, we've seen people so emboldened from the racism, the xenophobia, the anti-Semitic language that have been embedded in the White House and spewing all of that license coming out of that event after event, event after event, whether it was Charlottesville Whether it was a white supremacist in Louisville, Kentucky, who went to the Black church, thank God the doors were locked, but he went to Kroger and killed Black people. Whether it was a synagogue in Pittsburgh, whether it was a group that were convening on Facebook, spewing hatred, recruiting members, planning out deeds, and killing a federal officer in the Bay Area. All of those things created a new norm for us. Now, I'm not saying that we didn't feel and see racism. We know what that looked like. It existed. But when people get so emboldened, they will be in Charlottesville with tiki torch, chanting blood and skulls, a chant from the Nazis during World War II. When people feel so emboldened that they are okay with having one of the known white supremacist leaders, Steve Miller, in the White House as an advisor to the president, when people feel so emboldened that their entitlement would allow them to go to the US Capitol, NAACP will build for this moment. There are no questions about our relevancy. We don't need to have that conversation ever again. The only question and conversation we need to have is, how do we continue to build and to be stronger to respond to the urgent needs of now? Our mission is broad enough. It is a proactive mission, improving the quality of life, and you name the category, education, you name the category. But that second part of that mission is fighting against discrimination. And we must do both at the same time, improve the quality and fight against. Because if we don't fight against white supremacist behavior, what we're allowing to take place is domestic terrorism to overthrow this government. Let's be clear. You can't live in a democracy and allow white supremacy to continue to exist. They are opposites. They are opposed to each other. Because what we witnessed on January 6th is white supremacists, they are now questioning the legitimacy of our citizenship, the legitimacy of our franchise, our ability to pick policymakers at the ballot box. In this country, we have touted around the globe that we settle our differences at the ballot box. But what we witnessed after November, despite over 60 lawsuits filed, in NAACP, we had to intervene in about 34 of those lawsuits. What we witnessed in November was the reality of voters going to the polls, making a decision, and elections being certified in those who carry a white supremacist entitlement mentality, feeling as if something was taken from them. When in fact, the voters have spoken. Those voters look like many of us on this lines. Those voters understand that the hard-fought battles of our ancestors and many among us allowed us the ability to step into our agency and cast our ballots. So whether it was in Wayne County, Michigan, Detroit, but NAACP had a robust voter turnout program, or in Philadelphia, where we worked with that community and aggressively got votes out. Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, working really hard, Milwaukee, working really hard, Atlanta and the metro Atlanta areas. It was through efforts by the NAACP and many others to ensure that our franchise would not be diluted, that our collective currency, the vote, will be heard loud and clear. And the outcome of that set us on a new direction. COVID has impaired so much, but racism has destroyed for so many decades. It is our opportunity as an organization to continue to speak, not because I have a title, but because you allow us to exist. Leadership is not about individuals, it is about the collective whole. And we are a part of that collective whole, the Tennessee State Conference, and all that you have done and continue to do and plan to do is not taken for granted. And with that, I say thank you.
Thank you, President Johnson, for your words of wisdom. leadership and encouragement. I am truly a student of this movement. Currently, with policy roadblocks that are in place, what are your recommendations to advance racial equity and justice during this political climate?
Well, racial equity is a big word. And when we began to talk to the new administration, we fell back away from talking about individual appointments and started talking about racial equity for the whole of government. And racial equity is to ensure that those of us who have been impaired from progress because of public policy action understand structural barriers, structural racism is not about individuals, it's about public policy. And if you have a public policy doing the New Deal, like the Social Security safety net, something that so many of us rely on today, and we understand that when it was first adopted, Southern legislators was able to successfully amend the bill and put in the bill that everyone could qualify for Social Security except domestic workers and agricultural workers. And at that time, 40% of all Black folks were domestic and agricultural workers, resulting in us losing that safety net for several decades. Then under those same New Deal policies, when the federal home mortgage program was adopted and bankers and developers were able to get an exception in the clause allowing for local banks and local developers to determine who would qualify for home mortgages and who wouldn't, and where those home mortgages will be allowed, locking out African Americans under those subjective standards from being able to participate in the largest wealth generator in this country, home mortgage and home ownerships, accumulating equity. And banks all across the country aggressively participated in this exclusionary policy, resulting in us losing equity. And then those same developers and banks drew lines around certain areas and say, Blacks can live in these areas, redlining, devaluing our property. Devaluing our property, therefore the tax basis to support our school districts would not be enough to provide our children with a quality education. Structural barriers is not about people, it's public policy. And for us in this moment, we need to identify all of those policy decisions and reverse them. Identify the harm that was created against our community and repair the harm. And project out looking forward to ensure that any future policy that's been adopted would not be embedded with structural barriers based on race. And what's funny about those structural barriers, you ain't never got to say Black or white. All you have to do is say, these workers qualify and these don't. You ain't got to say Black or white. All you got to do is create the posture so there's a subjective policy created and allow local individuals who are already empowered to make the decision, and their decision so happen to be race neutral, but the outcome is racist. You don't have to call it out Black or white. You can say, well, if you're going to force us to integrate schools, we're going to move out of certain areas so that where the property value would collapse, and there would not be enough resources to support the school so that the kids can be provided with a quality education. And right next door, you inflate the property value, those school districts have more resources, and we start looking at each other like, wait a minute, we got Black folks on the school board now, wait a minute, we got Black administrators, why these kids ain't learning more? And we don't go to the heart of the fleecing of the resources from our children, so our children are not able to be provided with the quality education necessary to maneuver in a global economy.
Well said, Mr. President. We will now take a question from our listening audience.
Yes, Mr. Carter, we have a question that's coming from Jackson, Tennessee. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Daphne, and thank you, President Sweetlove. I'm Amira Graves, the advisor to the Lane College chapter of the NAACP, and a member of the Jackson-Madison County branch. And thank you so much, President Johnson, for your leadership, and it's great having you with us today. My question is, as you know, HR 1, the For the People Act, passed in the House this past week. It strengthens voting rights protections. And also the George Floyd Act passed in the House this past week as well. It bans chokeholds, as you know, and it requires other police reform measures. Do you think that these pieces of legislation have a real chance of passing in the Senate? And if Senate support is lacking, what should our units do to gain Senate support for these pieces of legislation?
Great questions. We just witnessed today the passing of the COVID relief bill. Vote 50 to 49. Every single piece of legislation from this point forward it will more than likely be a partisan vote. And because of that, there will be a lot of maneuvering and compromises that must be made to advance the ball. We didn't get here in 4 years. We got here in over 400 years. Much of the fixes that are going to be needed won't be done in the next 4 years. Our role as NAACP is to keep the pressure on, to advance the ball as far and as fast as we can. I'm one to believe that in politics, there are no coincidences. There's only positioning and preparedness. And we must, as an organization, be positioned properly and prepared so when the opportunity opens itself, we seize the moment. You can't predict what's going to happen with any vote between now and the next month on how members will vote. We can't even predict if the Lord willing would take somebody out of the seat that they're in. But what we can do as an association is be positioned and prepared. And I'm not going to go biblical, but I am. It's like Joshua, when he got up to that moment, he told people to get those stones, and they were positioned along the river. The stones was allowed them to remember that they had already come through a struggle. We've been through a struggle. We have been here. We've seen this before. We're 112 years old, but through faith and understanding and remembering with those stones, we're going to get on the side of the current. If we're positioned and prepared with the knowledge, so that when the current's slow and pardon and open for us to go to what's been get committed, we will succeed.
Thank you, President Johnson. Again, wise words. Again, we will take another question from the floor, our listening audience.
Mr. Connor, we have someone from Knoxville, Tennessee. Go ahead, Knoxville, Tennessee.
Thank you, Daphne. Thank you, President Johnson, for being with us. This is Sam Brown, president of the Knoxville branch of the NAACP. My question is, as where you sit as president right now, in this present time, what do you see as the next frontier for civil rights, and how will the NAACP nationally, through the hallmark strategies of legislation and litigation, forge ahead?
What's old is new, what's new is old. I think the same fight we've always been fighting is the fight we will continue to fight. Understand, in this democracy, we must ensure that it's more representative. And in order for us to do that is to work as hard as we can that each one of our voices can be heard, not only at the ballot box, but in the public policy decision realm. Voting is the key in a democracy. Voters have the currency. And anytime we have a strong democracy, we keep capital in check. But when capital, I mean, when democracy is weak, that means we're not participating, our voices ain't heard, capital exploit people. They exploited us for free labor. We exploited for cheap labor, segregation. We exploited in far too many southern states by denying our ability to collectively bargain. And so we have to make sure we strengthen the democracy through our full participation and engagement so that our communities are not exploited. What me saying that is that's the same fight from 1950. That's the same fight from 1865 to ensure that our agency, our vote, our franchise, our ability to have a voice in the formation of public policy is as robust and as strong and as clear as possible as it was in November, so that the needs and interests of our communities can be met in all of the areas we need it met, whether it's education or criminal justice reform, wealth creation and building. All of those things hinge on public policy decisions, which hinge on policymakers to be in place, which hinge on our ability to vote, which hinge on our understanding of our currency, the vote.
President Johnson, I'm reminded of a saying. It says, we sing, we shall overcome, so that the next generation will have it easier coming over. What are your marching orders for next generation leaders and youth councils within our association?
Great question. So I am someone who benefited mightily by being engaged as a state youth president, as a college chapter president. It is through those mechanisms that I learned how to navigate collectively and within organizational structures. We must at every juncture empower our young people to have a voice. And the beautiful thing about my experience was I was allowed to make mistakes. That's so important because you don't learn if you don't make a mistake, and none of us are perfect. So we have to give the space for our youth councils to engage on what they want to do, because that's the training ground to operate within organizational structure, how to make and carry emotion, how to participate in a structured meeting and not get sidetracked by the procedures of the meeting while understanding the procedures so you can get to the substance. That once we hit that tipping point of individuals who are over 25, and we have this problem within all of our communities that you could get young people engaged in high school and in college, but once they leave college 25, life hit. They have families and mortgages and student loans and career decisions and all of the anxieties of being an adult. We have to create space for those individuals to still exist within the association, because we can't afford for any of our people to leave and then come back when they get 50, 55, and going to get back engaged, because there's so much to be learned in that place. I'm saying all out to say what needs to happen is opening up space and being as creative as possible so that all of our talents to come forward. And final point on this, we can never allow for us to fall into an us versus us, young versus old. I know as many old fools as I do young. I know as many energetic young people as I do energetic, seasoned veterans. At the end of the day, our movements are successful when we have the ingredients of the energy of our young people, the wisdom of our elders, and the continuity of those who are between the two ages, all in the same pot. Sometimes that pot requires some friction. Sometimes that pot will be completely aligned, but at all times, that pot create the right ingredients to move things forward.
To all of our listeners, we are unable to answer all questions today, but we will certainly try to do our best. Mr. President, we have an administrative question that's in the chat. It says, what is the national plan to address issues associated with branches, chapters, and councils challenges in processing memberships through Salesforce portal?
We are learning and trying to perfect that system. Quite frankly, what ended up happening this time last year, we thought we were going in the right direction, then COVID hit. And then we had to shut offices down. And so as we continue to staff up, we just unveiled at the February board meeting our staffing org chart and the plan that go with that. And a lot of that had to do with building up an IT team that can be more responsive to units, understanding that our branch and field, this is where President Sweetlove talked about I worker too much. She's had to step in on a lot of stuff that staff should have been doing, but we have to build up our staffs to do it, because what was inherited was a fraction of what's needed. And so my job now is to build out what's needed so that our units can continue to grow and get stronger.
We'll now take a question from our live listening audience.
Mr. Carter, we have a question coming from Brownsville, Tennessee. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Fitzgerald Mann. I'm the first vice president of the Haywood County branch. First of all, thank you for your service and your leadership to this great organization. My question is twofold. With the current legislation we're seeing across the state to disenfranchise voters, primarily Black, Brown, and people of color, how does the NAACP currently see their strategy in addressing some of these shortcomings with legislation that we're seeing across the country? And the second part, with the passing of the Recovery Act today, one of the questions, especially in the southern portion of our country, is the initiative toward Black farmers. Does the NAACP have any views or any operations to support that Black farmers initiative to, again, balance the equity or the loss of equity over time from that with this legislation being passed?
So take the last question first. Absolutely, we have been in ongoing communication with the Association of Southern Cooperative, is an association of Black farmers across the country, about different things needed to ensure the intentional harm brought against Black farmers can be addressed. Some of those conversations have been also with Shirley Sherrod, who now understands how rural development works and to support farmers. Many farmers know, but was locked out of all of the support that other farms were getting, from fencing to ponds for cattle to all type of stuff that Black farmers didn't realize federal government were providing, and they were paying for while their neighbor farmers were getting it completely subsidized. If you want to talk about welfare, that's one of the biggest welfare systems in this country, and it's the corporate welfare for in the agricultural space. But with that said, we're not saying it's a bad thing. We just want to make sure it's inclusive and we can have farmers assisted for the harm created. So we've been on several conversations with the incoming Secretary of Ag. He and I have had some spirited discussions about ways forward. And I look forward to work with his administration to ensure access to the support for farmers is accelerated for Black farmers as we look at ways to repair the harm from the past. Your first question dealing with the wave of legislation as we're seeing across the country. You know, there are two approaches here. One is figuring out a strategy for some type of federal requirement to halt this type of assault on our voting rights. And the second is looking at the individual state legislation and figuring out which lawsuits are we going to file as we try to navigate with the stacking of the court we've seen by the prior administration. Filing a lawsuit is only one step. Winning a lawsuit is ultimately the goal, and winning it throughout. And if you have judges that you are unfamiliar with or who many deem unfit and unqualified to serve, which jurisdiction, which venue you bring your lawsuits in can have a devastating impact. So state legislative bodies are convening and announcing vote suppression measures in terms of public policy. We're monitoring and tracking to determine how best to proceed. There is no quick fix here. It is an all-out assault. But freedom is a constant struggle, and we are freedom fighters, so we're going to continue to fight.
Well said, Mr. President. We will take another question from the floor. I have Mr. President, if you would give a quick comment on the eviction moratorium.
So no more than, I think Ms. Watts is better situated to discuss it, but there is a moratorium, which is a good thing. I'm more concerned with how we going to pivot in this moment once the moratorium ends and what's going to happen. But the other side of that, we have a lot of people in our community who are property owners who subsidize their income from renting to individuals, and they may have 1, 2, 3 homes, and it could be family homes, and that's the way they derive their income. And that's another side of this coin, because we don't want them to lose assets. And so it's a delicate balance, and I don't have a clear solution, but recognizing that we are in the midst of a problem. We want everyone to have a home, and we want to come out of this pandemic whole. The economic crisis as a result of this pandemic is as much man-made as it is based on science. Medical health experts need to advise best how to get out of this moment. But because we didn't follow the advice, we've only accelerated the harm of the most vulnerable citizens in this country, Black, white, green, and yellow. And we're watching a disproportionate impact on our community.
We'd now like to take another live question from our listening audience.
Hey, Mr. Carter, this question is coming from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Go ahead, Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Thank you, President Johnson. I'm Ann Pierre, Chattanooga Hamilton County Branch, current president. My question is, what is the status of the case filed by the NAACP against former President Trump related to the January 6, 2021 issue at the Capitol? And what will be the gain from to the plaintiff as a result of this suit?
Thank you, great question. So the NAACP, our general counsel office, is the lawyer of record. We are representing now Congressman Benny Thompson, who is the chairman of Homeland Security, under a statute that was adopted in 1871, commonly known as the Ku Klux Klan Act. And in that act, one of the sections say that a plaintiff who's been harmed, which has to be a member of Congress, if that plaintiff have been interrupted in carrying out their congressional duties, they can bring a claim against any of the individuals who is causing the harm, posing a threat, and things of that nature. It was created in 1871 because we had members of Congress from Southern states in the aftermath of the Civil War seeking to carry out their duties in the reunification of this nation. The Confederacy was a treasonous act. It was an attempt to separate Southern states that joined the Confederacy from the Union. It was African soldiers, African because they were not Americans, Africans because that's the continent of origins and they were denied knowledge of which country. They began to pick up arms to reinforce Sherman and other general troops to fight back the Confederacy. And as a result of that, those Africans saved the Union. No one freed them. Those Africans saved the Union. In fact, in one of the Civil War cemeteries in Vicksburg, Mississippi, one of the ones that's celebrated, 40% of all of the Civil War soldiers buried in that federally designated cemetery are commissioned African soldiers. So we fought for our liberation, we fought for our freedom, and as a result of that fight, it was the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, giving us citizenship, making us African Americans, allowing us to have input. And as a result of that, Southern states began to elect members of Congress in the United States Senate. And those individuals who were able to participate and vote was able to do so because they were now citizens. And those who could not vote was those who joined the Confederate Army, which was an act of treason, and they no longer had the right to vote. It's important for us to understand the backdrop of this act. And some of those individuals who could no longer vote because they committed the act of treason began to organize under new groups. One of the most known groups that was started right there in Tennessee, commonly recognized a person who organized was Nathan Bedford Forrest. The Ku Klux Klan began to organize. These were former Confederate soldiers who no longer were citizens of this country because of their treasonous act, began to try to intimidate and assault members of the United States Congress. Therefore, Congress passed this act as a tool to fight against that level of intimidation. We have not had to use this act. The act basically say if a member of Congress is being disrupted from carrying out their duties, this is a tool that can be used to fight back. And because we have not seen any formal charges, criminal charges, brought by the individuals involved, criminal charges not just by those who entered the Capitol, but everybody that was a part of the conspiracy, a conspiracy that was so clearly laid out during the impeachment process. And the distinction between what we're bringing and the criminal act, criminal charges and impeachment, one is a political process, is not in our legal system. What we're bringing is a civil case. What we're waiting to see from the Department of Justice or any state AG is the criminal case. And so we filed the civil case after the political process failed us and there's been no criminal charges. And in a civil case, we're pursuing a course of action to hold everyone accountable financially. Very similar to what took place in the 70s when the Southern Poverty Law Center went after one of the largest chapters of the Ku Klux Klan and won a civil case that bankrupted them. This is an action that was so important because the narrative of what took place on January 6th would have been hijacked and people would have talked about unifying the country and everybody getting along without anybody being held accountable. You cannot heal a nation until you have accountability for the wrong that has taken place. And we know from our lived experience of Black folks in this country, especially in the South, if you allow domestic terrorists who are white supremacists not be held accountable, more people will be harmed. What we witnessed in our communities in the 30s, in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, in many areas, was a reign of terror by domestic terrorists operating under this notion of white supremacy as they burned crosses in our front yards and lynched people and killed people and did all of that, and nobody was held accountable. this lawsuit was to hold people accountable. And where we are now, we have more members of Congress signing up as plaintiffs. As we proceed through the legal maneuverings that's required, so there can be a hearing and people be held accountable for the harm they brought against not just the Black community or the white community, the harm they were seeking to bring against our Constitution and this democracy.
Thank you, President Johnson. With the essence of time, we must proceed forward. Any unanswered questions within the question and answer chat box, we will send over to President Johnson's office for an answer later this week. President Johnson, if you would, please give us closing remarks. Immediately following, we will have remarks from our state conference president, Gloria Jean Sweetlove.
My closing remarks very similar to my opening remarks, but much shorter. I simply say thank you. Thank you for the sacrifice. Thank you for standing up across the state of Tennessee for the communities that we come from, the communities that need our voices, the communities that look for us when there are no other answers. And not that we always have the answers, but if we don't come together and stay together, we wouldn't have the ability to collectively approach the systemic problem we have seen far too long. My family is from Tennessee, Crockett County and Dyer County. And I understand every summer that I visited my grandparents and others, the pervasiveness of white supremacist activity across the state of Tennessee is no different than how it was in Alabama or Georgia or anywhere else. But it's only because we exist that we are able to hold the line so that some of the hardship that we've seen visited upon us in prior decades is not as pervasive now as it was then. So I simply say thank you for all that you do.
Thank you again.
Mr. President, and thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy day to come and be with us. We really, really appreciate your great leadership. Thanks to David Connor for an excellent job of facilitating, as he always does. Thank you to all the program participants. Thank you to our hardworking staff, Ms. Daphne, Ms. Alicia, Ms. Joyce, and all the other folks that work hard every day to make sure that the Tennessee State Conference, or the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, continues to stand up and stand out for those that are in need. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. This concludes our event. Thank you so much for joining us for the 17th Annual Race Relations